We've talked a lot about the physical toll of the massacre at Robb Elementary in Uvalde, Texas. The horrific deaths of 19 children, the two teachers who reportedly sacrificed themselves trying to save their students, and the many others who were physically injured. But there's also the emotional toll for the kids who witnessed the shooting and lost friends and classmates, and the millions of other kids across the country trying to process what's happened once again. I'm joined by Dr. Dan Dickstein, Associate Chief and Director of Research of the Division of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry at McLean Hospital, and Dr. Jean Beresin, Executive Director of the MGH Clay Center for Young Healthy Minds. Welcome to both of you. Dr. Dickstein, I want to start with you first and just ask, what should parents now, parents that weren't directly involved with the shooting, how should they be talking to their teens and their children about the shooting now?
So I think it's an important question. It's not an easy question. It's a question I ask my own family. I have a 13 and a 15-year-old. I think exactly as you said, the biggest desire in some ways for many people may be not to talk about it, but I think that's really not the way to go. A parent's biggest gift to their child is to create a safe space where kids can talk about any of the things that are on their mind, from good stuff to horrible stuff, and to ask it in a way that's not just a one-word possibility. What do you think about this? What have you heard about this? To really generate a discussion. On the other hand, I think it's really important that parents and kids don't just totally dwell on this and stay stuck. They need to take breaks from the media. They need to be able to move forward with jobs and going to school.
Dr. Beresin, I often have conversations. I'm a parent myself, and I have conversations with other parents whenever there's a difficult topic in the news, which there always is. I mean, this is particularly hard-hitting and devastating, and it also involves children in schools. But, whether it's about marriage equality or transgender issues or the political landscape, and parents will say, well, it's really hard to have those conversations with my kids. And I always say, well, if you're religious, you're talking about Passover on a regular basis, and that's a difficult conversation. Or you're talking about, the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. If you're Christian, that's a difficult conversation. So there are paths to have difficult conversations in an age-appropriate way. Where can parents find resources to be able to do that, though? Because we often feel like we're way out of our depth.
Well, the Clay Center has resources. I mean, and one of the things that we try to focus on, and we have plenty of blogs and podcasts about this. In fact, we have a whole page devoted to resources for parents. Sadly, there have been too many mass shootings. But some of the main points, to echo a little bit about what Dan said. Number one, social supports are incredibly important. So I think it's super important for parents and caregivers of all sorts, whether you're a coach or a teacher or a clergy, to be talking with each other. We're pack animals, we humans. We need each other, and we need social supports. We also need to help each other control our own anxiety, because all the research shows that parents can be most effective talking with their kids when their anxiety is in check. It's kind of like when the flight attendant says, if the pressure goes down, put the oxygen mask on yourself first, and then help the person next to you. So how can we help each other control our anxiety? And there's plenty of ways, whether it's meditation or yoga or listening to music. Talking with each other is a great way of doing it. Getting ideas from other parents about how to talk to, there's a difference. Another point that Dan made, which is really important, is we talk to school-age kids differently than we talk to adolescents. We have to be thinking developmentally. I mean, I can go into the details if you want, but I think that it's super important to kind of know how kids age, say, 6 through 12 think and behave and what their needs are, and the differences between those who are, say, 14 to 18. And we tailor our conversations to the developmental levels of the child.
Dr. Dickstein, the other thing that you pointed out, too, is also just the saturation of the news stories in the media. And it's always been the case, but now with social media, with kids spending so much screen time where, it's not just screen time anymore, it's also their school books, it's their classwork, it's how they stay connected to their friends, and it's almost impossible for them to avoid it. How can parents manage what their kids are seeing online when it comes to, especially around this horrific shooting, but also some of the other news that just now gets delivered to them? Where, I would use, when I was a kid, I'd have to turn on the TV or pick up a newspaper to find it, but it's actually being thrust at them.
So it's a great question. Again, I think, media, we've never had so much power at our fingertips to learn about people, places, events all over the world. Honestly, I think the biggest advice that, again, we do even in my house is take a break. Screens can be turned off. It may sound strange, but phones can actually be put down. They can be put out of your pockets. Doesn't mean you have to, that will generate conversation, but at least you could not be glued to the media. I also think instead of focusing on the control of a parent, I think the biggest control is sort of what Dr. Beresin said about parents controlling their emotions and parents controlling in some ways the flow of things, to thinking about how do I make time to talk, to share what's going on with me in a developmentally role appropriate way, to model that for kids about sharing what's appropriate. I guess I'd also say that, as Dr. Beresin said, development is important. So this is not a one and done thing, right? So this is a conversation that may happen now, or it may come up for a child in another couple weeks. I wish this was the only sort of tragedy going on, but unfortunately, a couple days before this, there was another shooting. A couple days before this, there was another shooting. There are always events that happen, unfortunately. The question is, can parents make regular time to check in with their kids?
Dr. Beresin, I want to play off that point a bit. I mean, this is a particular American tragedy, but there's tragedy all the time. And I think each of our parents have probably lived through things. My parents were born, in 1918 and 1920 and lived through the Depression and lived through all sorts of things. And used to tell me stories, and I'd be like, oh, that's funny. You had to go pick up coal because you didn't have enough heat. And we often talk about, the resilience of kids and the resilience of children, which I think sometimes now we look at that and say, well, it wasn't resilience, it was burying how they felt, and it wasn't allowing them space to grieve or to grow. And I think some parents now haven't had as much hardship or been aware of the tragedies that many have gone through. So they're also dealing with this for the first time themselves. How do you moderate all that with your kids? How do you take the attitude that bad things are going to happen, we're going to try and keep you safe, but here's what we need to do when things go wrong?
Terrific question. So one of the things that I think we don't do that we could be doing and should be doing is having conversations starting with preschool kids and continuing the conversations. But as Dan was saying, not having family meetings. The last thing a kid wants to do is to have a family meeting. You get the eye roll and then they're going to shut down. But having frequent conversations, if you start preschool and it becomes part of the fabric of your family, to talk with each other about how we do. Have you heard about X, Y, and Z? It's super important, and it becomes, and that then we're likely to have the kids come to us or the teenagers come to us and ask us. Now, the second thing you mentioned is adversity. We've all been through adversity of one kind or another. My mom was born in 1916, and kids love family stories. They love narratives. And so when you have a bad time, one of the things that can be part of a conversation is, how do we get through this? How can we manage this? Of course, it'll be different. You're not going to ask a preschooler, but school-age kids, and they love to hear family stories. So my kids used to love to hear my mom talk about the Great Depression in 1916 when she played the piano, because she was a concert pianist, in the department stores for pennies. And she loved one particular, the Dickstein, and the kids say, tell us about the piano, tell us about the Depression. So family narratives, and you can say, remember when the hurricane hit and the house got flooded. Remember when the tree fell on the house. Remember, there are numerous narratives, and they're used in every spiritual tradition. If you think about it, whether it's the Torah or the Quran or the Bible, it's the narratives that actually tell the stories, are discussed, and talking about how you would manage those situations. So I would apply that same kind of principle to all of our families, and use the narratives and how we've gotten through adversity in the past, and ask for their advice. What would you do? What should we do? Let them feel that they can make a contribution to the conversation.
Dr. Dickstein, we're also talking about this support, this institutional support that we're just assuming is there, and we're also talking at a time where kids and adolescents and teens are in crisis more often and in greater proportions than they have been in the past. It seems we don't have the support networks in many of the public schools, the guidance counselors, the nurses. We don't have them. Many kids have not been in school due to COVID and other reasons. We've got kids dealing with great loss from the million Americans who have died due to COVID-related illness. Obviously, the racial reckoning, the images that we're going through, finally dealing with those things. It's a lot for this generation coming up. And, as we know, and I know that you know better than I, we're urging people to get help if they need it for their teens. But I have, friends who don't want to go to the emergency room with their kids because there's no beds and they don't want to have to board there for 3 to 4 weeks waiting for a bed. What's a parent to do really to navigate all this, to get the kind of support they need for their child or their teen when they're in distress?
That is a fabulous question. I mean, so undoubtedly, this is a tough time. In October, the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, American Academy of Pediatrics, and Children's Hospital Association of America issued a joint statement, a rare joint statement, talking about the crisis in youth mental health. The Surgeon General issued a report in December talking about issues of youth mental health. So the good news is that finally there's a focus on youth mental health. The challenge is trying to figure out ways to grow a system, to fix a system that really is an ad hoc system, doesn't happen overnight. I do hope that this continued attention, it's not just a one news story thing and then we move forward. I hope people will be creative, will do some resources and address things. But I think that what is a parent to do now while you're waiting for the system? I think, help is not just necessarily from a doctor, psychiatrist, psychologist, or social worker. Help can be from peers. Help can be from a coach. Help can be from a school, from another parent, from a faith leader. It can be, there are definitely lots of things on the internet out there, some good, some not so good. I think probably the biggest thing that people can do is taking care of themselves with routines is important. So the routine of trying to get regular sleep, trying to get regular exercise, trying to go to school or do social things in a COVID safe way, to make connection. All those things have been shown to improve mental health. And then I think, as Dr. Beresin said, these are things that need to be habits. We're focusing on the crisis, but in some ways, part of the way we get out of a crisis is focus on the routine, and the routine family discussions, the routine checking in, instead of just thinking about the high highs and the low lows. It's a matter of thinking about each day, what are we doing as a family, as a community, as a society, as a neighborhood, I think, to try to help one another.
As we wrap up here, Dr. Beresin, I'm wondering also, there is going to be a set of kids going to school who are not going to be super, super anxious, but are going to be nervous. There's always been the kids during, when we were hiding under our desks from Russian attacks, there were a subset that were really nervous about that. And there's going to be kids who are nervous about the drills that they go through at school. They're going to be nervous no matter what their parents do. Is the advice for those kids in general, to give them something to do to reinforce the safety that they're in, but that these drills, these terrible drills they have to go through, are to keep them safe, to try and accent the positive?
Yeah, I think that's so important. I mean, kids need reassurance. They also need coordination. And when I say coordination, I mean, it's so important that parents and caregivers are talking with each other, that the parents are in touch with their teachers and their coaches and their spiritual leaders, their community leaders, and that trying to convey the same message or a similar message is super important. We don't do enough of that. And for example, I mean, I agree that the media needs to be turned off at times or turned down. Too much information, especially for the school age kids. But you know, if the kids are getting the same messages and allowed to talk about their feelings and allowed to express themselves and are valid, are listened to, that their feelings are validated, and that they're given reassurance. And once we know what they're worried about, we can actually reassure them better. So what Dr. Dickstein was saying at the beginning is ask, what are your concerns, what are your worries, in an open-ended way. They may be worried that that their beloved dog is going to get shot. I mean, you never know until you ask. And so ask questions, validate, listen, reassure them, and try to coordinate with others in the community who can be doing the same thing. And what we've learned is that when kids have pretty much the same kinds of ability to communicate, and the same messaging is given across the domains within which they're living, they do better.
All right, doctors, I appreciate both of your expertise in joining us, and we'll assure you that we will continue having this conversation. Dr. Dan Dickstein and Dr. Jean Beresin, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.